I've lived in our seaside village for over 20 years now. It's a tight-knit community where everyone knows each other, and most of us own small boats with outboard motors. We're not wealthy by any means, but we get by comfortably enough. I work as a local carpenter, and fishing is both a hobby and a way to supplement our food supply. The trouble started about 6 months ago. At first, it was just whispers. Someone complaining about their gas being lower than they remembered. Another person wondering if they'd forgotten to fill up their tank. But then it became obvious. Someone was stealing gas from our boats. Now, in a small village like ours, this was a big deal. These weren't just inconvenient thefts, they were dangerous. My neighbor, a retired fisherman, nearly got stranded 3 miles offshore when his engine sputtered out. If he hadn't had his emergency radio, things could have gotten ugly. Another time, a young couple with their 2 kids had to paddle back to shore in the dark. We were all getting pretty worried and angry. The thefts kept happening and nobody could catch the culprit. Security cameras weren't common in our village and most of us never thought we'd need them. That's when my friend, who works at the local grocery store, decided to take action. He went to see our police chief, a practical man who'd served our community for decades. My friend explained his concerns about the gas thefts, warning that someone could get seriously hurt if this continued. The police chief's response was unexpected. He suggested filling a can with gas and sugar. My friend was worried about the legality of such action and the potential engine damage it could cause. The chief assured him it wasn't illegal to mix sugar with his own gas, and if someone stole it, that would be their problem. He added that if the thief filed a complaint, he would make sure to thoroughly investigate all the recent thefts. The next day, my friend left a shiny new gas can in his boat, filled with gas and a generous helping of sugar. Sure enough, it disappeared overnight. About a week later, I was at the local coffee shop when I overheard some interesting news. A brand new 120 horsepower outboard motor had been brought into our local repair shop. In a village our size, news travels fast. The mechanic, who's been fixing our engines for the past 30 years, knew exactly what he was looking at when he opened up that engine. When the mechanic told the owner that the engine was completely ruined and appeared to be sabotaged, suggesting they should report it to the police, the owner became visibly nervous. He quickly dismissed the idea of involving law enforcement, stammering that it wasn't necessary. The mechanic pressed the issue, emphasizing the seriousness of the damage, but the owner insisted on just buying a new engine instead, clearly wanting to drop the subject entirely. The owner of that engine was actually Mr. Respected Community Leader, a businessman who sat on our town council and ran the local real estate office. He'd always presented himself as this pillar of the community, always talking about local values and tradition during town meetings. The story spread through our village like wildfire. People started connecting the dots. How he'd recently bought a fancy new car despite his business supposedly struggling. How he'd been unusually interested in everyone's boating schedules. And how the thefts had always somehow missed his boat. Nobody confronted him directly. We didn't have to. The whispers and knowing looks were enough. He couldn't go to the grocery store without people falling silent when he walked in. His real estate business dried up. Nobody wanted to deal with a thief. 3 months later, a moving truck showed up at his house. He left without saying goodbye to anyone, and his house sold for way below market value. Last I heard, he moved to a city several hours away. The gas theft stopped completely, and our village returned to normal. These days, it's just another story we tell around the harbor. Let me tell you about my grandfather. He's always been the definition of tough love. Served in the military for 25 years, retired as a sergeant major, and bought himself a modest house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The area used to be really nice when he first moved in, but over the years, it started attracting more and more homeless people. Some of them were decent folks down on their luck, but others, well, they were trouble. My grandfather never complained though. He kept his property well maintained, helped the neighbors when they needed it, and minded his own business. He even volunteered at the local veterans shelter twice a week, so he understood the struggles some people faced. But he had one strict rule: respect his property. I used to stay with him every summer when I was growing up, and he taught me everything about home maintenance, self-defense, and standing your ground. He always told me that you don't have to be mean, but you need to be firm. Those words really hit home when I heard about what happened last month. It was around 11 p.m., and my grandfather was in his study, reading one of his favorite military history books. That's when he heard the rattling. At first, he thought it might be the wind messing with his garden tools, but then he heard footsteps and mumbling. He muttered to himself, wondering what the hell that noise could be. He might be 72, but his military training never left him. He grabbed his registered handgun from the safe, the one he kept for home defense, and walked to his back door. The security light had kicked in, illuminating his backyard. There was this guy, probably in his 30s, stumbling around and trying to climb over my grandfather's storage shed. His eyes were glazed over, and he was talking to himself. Classic signs of being high on something. My grandfather demanded to know what the hell the guy was doing. The guy barely reacted to my grandfather's presence. He just turned his head slowly like he was watching a boring movie. He casually replied that he was just passing through, saying it like he was taking a stroll through a public park. My grandfather kept his gun pointed down but ready. My grandfather told him that no, he wasn't passing through and ordered him to get off the property. The intruder just laughed and continued trying to climb the shed. He tried to argue, saying this was the shortest way to the river. My grandfather responded that he didn't care where the guy was going. This was private property and he needed to leave now. The guy started getting agitated, waving his arms around. He started rambling about how nobody owns the earth and we're all just travelers in this cosmic journey. That's when my grandfather had enough. He cocked his gun, deliberately making it loud enough for the intruder to hear, and warned him to get off the property or he would shoot. The intruder finally seemed to notice the gun, but instead of being scared, he got angry. He started yelling about how my grandfather wouldn't shoot him and called him an oppressor trying to keep the free spirits down. He actually started walking toward my grandfather, which was probably the dumbest decision he could have made. My grandfather, being the expert marksman he was, fired a warning shot into the gravel right in front of the intruder's feet. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The intruder jumped back, suddenly a lot more sober than he appeared before. He started yelling that my grandfather was crazy and could have killed him. My grandfather calmly told him that it was just a warning shot, but the next one wouldn't be, and again ordered him to get off the property, this time emphasizing each word. The guy finally got the message and started backing away, but not before shouting threats about calling the cops and saying my grandfather would go to jail. My grandfather just calmly told him to go ahead, saying he'd wait right there. Sure enough, the police showed up about 15 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing. The intruder was waiting at the end of the street, still shouting about cosmic journeys and oppression. When the officers interviewed my grandfather, he calmly explained everything, showed them his gun license, and pointed out the security cameras he had installed last year. The footage clearly showed the intruder trespassing and my grandfather giving multiple warnings before firing the warning shot. One officer asked why he hadn't called them first. My grandfather explained that by the time they would have gotten there, the intruder could have broken into his shed, his house, or worse, adding that at 72 years old, he couldn't physically stop someone who was high and potentially dangerous. The officers nodded understanding. They knew the neighborhood's problems, and they knew my grandfather's reputation as a respected veteran. They ended up arresting the intruder, who turned out to have several outstanding warrants for burglary and drug possession. The intruder tried filing charges against my grandfather, but the district attorney took one look at the security footage and dismissed the case. My grandfather got to keep his gun, and word spread around the homeless community to stay away from the old veteran's house. These days, my grandfather still volunteers at the veteran shelter, still helps his neighbors, and still minds his own business. But nobody tries to pass through his property anymore. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property, it's about protecting your right to feel safe in your own home. This happened when I was around 10 years old back in 2005. My sister and I had 2 French lob rabbits. They were brothers and the sweetest pets you could imagine. We loved those bunnies more than anything. Every Friday my class had show and tell, and I'd finally gotten permission from both my mom and the school to bring my rabbits in. I was so excited to show them to my classmates. That morning my mom walked with me to school, carrying the bunnies in their travel carrier. When we reached the playground, she handed me the carrier and told me to find my teacher, and asked to put them behind her desk until show and tell. She told me she'd be back in an hour to pick them up after I was done, gave me a kiss goodbye, and started walking home. It was still early, about 10 minutes before we were allowed inside, and I couldn't spot my teacher through the windows. So I just stood there with the carrier, waiting. Of course, the rabbits caught everyone's attention. Soon, I had a small crowd of kids around me, all trying to peek at the bunnies. That's when this younger kid I'd never spoken to before came up to me. He wanted to let the rabbits out to play. I apologized and explained that they'd get scared with all these people around and might run away. The kid didn't like that answer. He tried opening the carrier himself but couldn't figure out how. I blocked the door with my foot, and he eventually gave up and ran off. A few minutes later, he came back with his mother. Let's call her Karen. She looked at me, turned to her son with this sickeningly sweet smile, and nodded at him. The kid squealed in delight and ran off to his friends. I was naive enough to think she was just showing interest in the rabbits. Then she walked right up to the carrier, picked it up, and started walking away with it. I stood there shocked for a moment before running after her. I politely asked her to give my bunnies back, but she ignored me completely. I asked again, explaining that they were my bunnies, but still got no response. So I grabbed the carrier and planted my feet, demanding she give them back because I needed them for show and tell. That's when she stopped, looked down at me, and yanked the carrier away, so hard that I cried out in pain. I heard my rabbit squeal too. She'd hurt them. But what happened next was even worse. She grabbed the front of my shirt with her free hand, got right in my face, and snarled that they weren't mine anymore. Then she shoved me hard. I fell backward onto the ground. I wasn't hurt badly, but I was terrified. I started crying, thinking I'd never see my rabbits again. Another parent came over and asked what was wrong. Through my tears, I explained that she was taking my bunnies away. Thankfully, my mom hadn't actually left yet. She'd been talking to my friend's parents nearby. She saw Karen push me down and came running over with my friend's parents. My friend's dad was a judo instructor, which turned out to be very useful. When a teacher blocked Karen's escape route, she went completely crazy. She started screaming about how her son deserved the rabbits, and how I didn't take proper care of them. Then she started swinging the carrier around, threatening to smash it against a pillar. My mom demanded her rabbits back, but Karen screamed that if her son couldn't have them, no one could. My mom and my friend's mom managed to grab the carrier away from her, while my friend's dad pinned her down as she kicked and screamed. The teacher called the police. When the police arrived, we easily proved the rabbits were ours with photos I'd brought for show and tell, including one of me with them. That's when Karen broke down crying, but nobody felt sorry for her. It turned out she was high on meth at the time and had coke in her purse. Even worse, she already had rabbits at home that she wasn't supposed to have because of previous animal abuse charges. Those poor rabbits were found dying from neglect. She ended up going to prison for several years, not just for trying to steal my rabbits, but for all the drugs and animal abuse too. Her son stopped coming to school after that. I guess he went to live with other relatives. My rabbits were okay, just a bit bruised. We took them to the vet right away to make sure, and they lived happy lives until 2009, and I still miss them every day. So, yeah, a violent drug addict tried to steal my beloved pets right in front of my school, and she ended up exactly where she belonged, behind bars, where she couldn't hurt any more animals or terrorize any more kids. I've been dealing with chronic insomnia lately, which means I often find myself doing everyday tasks at odd hours. Today was one of those days where I had to drag myself out of bed at 3 p.m. because my cat's treat jar was empty. Anyone who has cats knows there's no negotiating with them when it comes to their treats. They want what they want when they want it. I hadn't bothered changing out of my pajamas since I wasn't planning to make this a social occasion. I threw on my old gray hoodie, grabbed my Attack on Titan messenger bag, and headed to the grocery store a few blocks away. The outfit was completed with my beanie, some worn-out Doc Martens, and my trusty headphones blasting Slipknot to keep me somewhat awake. The store was relatively quiet when I walked in. I grabbed a basket and made my way to the pet food aisle, but I barely made it past the registers when this woman with neon green hair. She looked like she'd just escaped from a craft fair with her flowing shawl and crystals, stepped right in front of me. She immediately started demanding to know where the dish soap was, calling me little man, and complaining about how you people hide everything. Her tone was incredibly condescending. I pulled out one of my earbuds thinking I must have misheard her and asked her to repeat herself. She groaned in frustration and started yelling about the dish soap again, this time snapping her fingers in my face with each word like I was some kind of disobedient dog. I told her that while I knew where the dish soap was, her attitude made me disinclined to help her. She tried to start yelling again, but I cut her off. I shouted back at her, telling her that the store employees don't get paid enough to deal with her nonsense, and that I didn't even work there. I demanded she look at my appearance and tell me what about it could possibly make her think I was an employee. She stood there, shocked that someone would dare talk back to her, and just sputtered about how she'd never been treated this way before. A young employee from customer service rushed over and asked what was happening. Before anyone else could speak, Karen started screaming about how I had been rude to her and demanding that I be fired immediately. I asked the employee to get a manager, explaining that this woman seemed to think I worked there and clearly needed her eyes checked. The employee hurried off to find the manager, while Karen kept ranting about how I was going to be mega fired or whatever. I just put my earbud back in and ignored her, which only made her more furious. The manager arrived with the employee a few minutes later and tried to ask what was happening, but Karen interrupted him immediately. She started screaming about how I'd refused to help her find dish soap and demanded both my termination and compensation for her troubles. I explained simply that she was clueless, thinking I worked there when I was just shopping for cat food and treats. The manager tried to reason with her, pointing out that I was obviously a customer since pajama pants weren't part of their uniform. For the first time since this whole thing started, Karen actually looked at what I was wearing. Her face went through several interesting colors before settling on a deep red. The manager then told her that this was her third time that week harassing staff and customers. He told her she needed to leave and was banned from the location indefinitely, warning that they'd issue a trespass order if she returned. Karen responded by throwing her shopping basket on the floor, scattering its contents everywhere, and storming out while screaming threats about lawyers and how we'd all be hearing from them soon. The manager apologized to me, but I told him it wasn't his fault. The employee who'd helped earlier rang me up at customer service and even gave me a 25% discount on my cat supplies. When I got home, my cat was waiting by the door, completely unimpressed with how long it had taken me to fulfill my duties as her servant. She forgave me once I opened the treats, though, and now she's purring away in my lap like the queen she is. I guess sometimes it pays to look like you just rolled out of bed. At least the entitled people of the world can mistake you for an employee.